welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez Brothers trial transcript read-through. We are on the defense's case in California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez. We are on their first witness. This is Dr. Martin Fackler. And let's just get right into it. Let me shrink myself. Please hit the like button if you haven't done so already. We are on in the week of Thanksgiving in November of 1995. So specifically, this is Tuesday, November 21st, 1995. And Dr. Fackler is going to be on the stand this whole week, just FYI. So you are aware, meaning the Tuesday and Wednesday of this week in November of 95. All right, so let's just get started. The court says everybody's in court and we're ready to resume. Good morning. Mr. Levin, who is the other attorney for Erik, says, Your Honor, at the break, I have an appearance I'd like to be excused to make just across the hall in Muni Court, if I may. It may be a brief matter. The court says, At the break, sure. Mr. Levin says, It'll only take a few minutes. The court says, All right, we'll have the jury out, please. The jury enters the courtroom and the following proceedings are held. The court says the jury is in court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Fackler, the witness on the stand at the adjournment, having been previously sworn, testified further as follows. The court says the witness is on the stand. He has to state his name again, and court says, You may continue your examination. Ms. Abramson says, Dr. Fackler, returning for a moment to wound number 7, as described in Dr. Golden's autopsy reports, Mrs. Menendez's left thigh. Just a second till I get that. Certainly. Yes. You described yesterday how you disagreed with Dr. Golden's entrance and exit information, at least at the time that he wrote that report, correct? That's correct. Now, do you have an opinion? Dr. Fackler, well, strike that. You're also aware that Dr. Golden describes a series of wounds to Mrs. Menendez as number 8, which involves an entry wound below the knee and an exit wound to the base of the thigh. Yes. And a series of exits and re-entries at the back of the left leg for those wounds in the amended report of 95, I think. Yes, I have most of the amendment written out here and I have it, yes. Okay. Now, at the time of the autopsy, there's x-rays taken of Mrs. Menendez's left leg, correct? Yes, there was. And showing you what's been previously marked 178, does this appear to be a photograph of the x-ray of her left leg? Yes, it is. And does that photograph of the x-ray show that there are 2 bones at the time of autopsy that are broken? 2 different bones that are broken in that left leg? Yes, it does. And what are the 2 bones that appear in that x-ray to be broken? The tibia and the femur. Where is the tibia in the body? The tibia is the shin bone, the large bone of the lower leg extending from the knee to the ankle, and the femur is the single large bone that extends from the knee to the hip. Now, with respect to, and the femur is clearly broken at the time that this x-ray is taken? Yes, it is. Now, do you have an opinion, Dr. Fackler, as to whether or not it was that wound, number 8, that broke Mrs. Menendez's femur, or wound number 7, the one that we're looking at on the court here, on the chart here, which is to the left leg or the left thigh, the 1-inch deep wound that broke the femur? Well, I think both, because what we see on the x-ray is it's just top of the break of the femur. There are actually 2 breaks of the femur. There's a free segment of femur that measures approximately 2.5 to 3 inches long, and the bottom edge of this has the chewed out appearance that goes along with being hit by multiple buckshot. And also this medial condyle of the femur, I have no idea, which is the portion of the inside of the knee. That little bulge in there is chewed out the same way. I definitely think that was broken by the shot column. However, is that for number 8 you're talking about? Her wound number 8? That's wound number 8, yes. However, the other end of this segment, if you look at the upper end of the break, it appears to be a similar fracture, although there are some fragments. It's very difficult to tell. I think there's a possibility that the upper fracture might have been made by the temporary cavity associated with the previous wound and the lower end of this now freestanding segment broken by the shot column in number 8, but without a lateral x-ray, it's very difficult to tell, but that would be my opinion. Is it possible that wound number 7, the one that you're looking at, didn't break the femur at all? That all that damage was caused by wound number 8? That, of course, is also possible. There do appear to be pellet fragments around both of those break sites, correct? Yes, well, yes, but fewer around the top. It's difficult to. I need to show the jury which, when I'm talking, I think because it's difficult for them to understand it. There's another x ray. Let me show you the other one, 168. The witness says, "May I, Your Honor, just step over here?" The court says yes. The witness says, "I'll try to pick one of these. They're both the same. This x-ray includes the lower bone, the tibia, and also the femur, and this upper one just includes the femur, and I think I'll put this one aside. We're concerned with the break in the femur, and I'll use this." Miss Abramson says, "Okay, the pins are in the envelope." The witness says, "The difficulty with your question lies in that this is the segment that in the intact femur, this segment fits between this end and the end of the bone. And what we see here is in the x-ray of Mrs. Menendez's body at the time of the x-ray was taken, the end of the femur could easily fit with the lower fragment without this in the middle. And we know that's not the way it happened. What has happened here is she's had some foreshortening. It's not common when a long bone is fractured for the muscles to go into spasm and you have this foreshortening. And just the way the body is laid could also do that. So we do see these small fragments of buckshot and actual buckshot around the site. This is true, but it's very difficult to tell if when this were constructed, which site, if this would pull up and allow and they would remain down here with the fracture site here, or if they would go up to this level, if this were in place and be associated with this. So I just really can't tell. Ms. Abramson says, "Okay. And is it your opinion that the medical evidence is such that it's too ambiguous to call it one way or the other?" That is my opinion, yes. Now let's turn, if we can, Dr. Fackler, to a couple of general matters before we get to the last wound. Let's talk about the concept of gunshot injuries and pain. Do gunshot injuries necessarily cause immediately experienced pain in the person who receives the wound? Surprisingly, in the majority of cases, they do not. It is common for anyone who is in a situation where their attention is sharply focused. For instance, the military in the field of battle, police officer during a gunfight, to suffer gunshot wounds and not know they're hit. This is not at all uncommon. People who are not sharply focused and just happen to be hit by gunfire, the most common experience is they look around and thought somebody hit them with a stick or say like hit with something blunt like a small rod or something. Some people will say it's a little stinging, sort of like a bee sting. Almost never do they have excruciating pain. And this is not only gunshot. This includes people who have extremities blown off. This is not just my opinion. This has been well documented throughout history. The first well documented series was done by a Dr. Beecher, who's head of the anesthesia at Harvard Medical School in the Second World War. He reported this, and this is covered in a book called The Challenge of Pain by Melzak and Wall. And also covered in the book was a series by the Israelis in one of their wars where they pointed to the same experience where people who had extremities blown off from landmines and grenades and things did not have pain. And that's been my experience on the field of battle and in actually speaking to many people who have been wounded and questioning them about this. And every time I give a seminar to police, I ask how many have been shot, and I question them a little bit about it. And it's very uncommon to have people say it hurts. So that kind of blows the whole like it's so brutal and so terrible because they likely didn't feel anything. Anyways, um, that's been the state's, argument is that it's so brutal and just like such a horrific crime because the damage caused by the type of ammunition that they used is horrific, but whether you used a handgun or a shotgun, you would have likely gotten the same effect. They would have shot until their parents were no longer there because they were in fear. So regardless of how many gunshots they have or how much damage each gunshot made, they still would have shot to kill their parents because of the fear that they were having. And it doesn't change, but yet it doesn't change the circumstances, but the prosecution is trying to make it seem like because of the crime or because of the ammunition used, basically, that it's just this horrific, brutal, malicious thing, like they did it cold-blooded, all that they've been arguing since the first trial, which, as we know, is a bunch of garbage. Anyways, so it would make no sense to try to predict how people would react to gunshot wounds based on the notion that they're experiencing pain at any particular time. No, that would not make any sense. So, like, Dr. McCarthy was trying to insinuate, oh, Mrs. Menendez was in excruciating pain. Like he actually said that on the stand, and I think I think that might have been stricken. I'm not sure because it was inappropriate because he can't surmise if she was feeling any pain or not. But he tried. Anyways, um, so it's not it. This witness says it wouldn't make sense to try to determine how they would feel, what level of pain they felt, and what they would do with that pain. So you can't make assumptions based on any kind of pain. All right, so now let's turn to what Dr. Golden called wound number 5, I believe, on Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez now? Yes. Yes, I have it. I'm putting up exhibit 304, and I did subnumber these photographs, although they don't have labels yet, evidence labels. Let me get this out of the way of the jurors. Now, Dr. Fackler, with respect to this wound, you're familiar with Dr. Golden's description of it, which he never amended, which has been in his autopsy report since 1989, correct? Yes, I am. And you're familiar with the fact that Dr. Golden described this unequivocally as an antemortem wound, a wound sustained while the heart is still pumping, correct? Well, I'd have to read that. I didn't recall that specifically. He didn't use that phrase while the heart is pumping, but he did indicate all wounds here were antemortem. Yes, that's right. He indicated that as I think is a general statement, not with each wound. I'm looking, are you saying it is with this particular description of the wound? I don't see it right here. I don't know if it's right there, but he indicated all the wounds. He indicated, yes, as a general statement, this is true. All the wounds to Mr. Menendez, he indicated was ante-mortem while he was still alive, correct? Yes. Does he give a description of something he observed while he was dissecting this wound that is the most reliable evidence that a wound is antemortem? Yes. He talked about, if you look at page 7 of his report, and that's what I'm doing. Third from the last paragraph. Yes, he states here there was hemorrhage along the entire wound path as well as at the fracture above. And he's talking about hemorrhage from the small capillaries and small vessels that he can see if he actually dissects and looks at the wound. He can see blood along and that's what he's speaking about. And is hemorrhage along the wound path the most reliable indication that a wound is antemortem? Yes, I would think it would be, but that's a little bit out of my field. Is there anything that you saw in the observation of the condition of this wound that indicates that it is not antemortem? No. Now, in addition to that original description of hemorrhage along the entire wound path and at the fracture site, by the way, does that mean, and at the fracture site, does that mean he dissected down to the bone to the fracture? Well, yes, he describes it, certainly. And in his amendment of 1995, did Dr. Golden also indicate that during the process where he dissected to the fracture site, he did not see any evidence that the femoral artery was perforated in any way? Where was that again? The September 95 amendment. The 95 amendment, oh, yes, that's the last paragraph. Last paragraph, he stated, you don't have to read it out loud. In fact, you shouldn't read it out loud against the rules. All right, now, based on your experience and expertise in the area of wound ballistics, is it logical that this wound that we are seeing on Mr. Menendez's thigh, that the large vessels, such as the femoral artery and others, would not be damaged by such a wound? Well, it would certainly depend on whether the shot column, which at this point was acting like a single projectile because it was very close together, because you can see that because of the blowout entrance and exit from cavitation, which means the shot was very close together. And on the x-ray, you don't see any shot, but just a few very, very minute fragments, which indicated the shot column probably came close enough to the femur, so just a few scraped a little. So it just sort of brushed by the femur. Yes, if that shot column happened to hit the femur, hit the artery, it would break it. But and if it didn't, then the fact that the bone is broken and you have this big entrance and exit from stretching does not mean that the artery would be broken by the cavitation. This is another fairly common misconception that you see sometimes in the papers when they're speaking about the horrors of high velocity bullet wounds, and it says arteries are torn when they're not hit by the vessel, but they're torn away, or but they're torn anyway. Do you mean when they're not hit by the projectile? By the projectile, yes, they're torn. Anyways, this has been very well documented also in the 1962 edition by Wound Ballistics that I've referred to previously, in which they've proven this experimentally. They said that on the field of battle, it's been seen commonly that you will have bones broken and then the large vessels that are very near the bone not broken. Very, very commonly seen. And in order to duplicate this in a laboratory, they did some shots on animals and found that they could easily break the bone and not break the vessel. Oh, that's horrible. I hate these animal testings. Ugh. And I've done some laboratory studies to show the same thing. Concerning your, just for a moment here to sideline concerning your laboratory studies and your research, you had described in some detail the original research that you did at the Wound Ballistics Laboratory by using the specifically made gelatin. Did you also, and have you over the years, done numerous experiments on animal tissue, both living but anesthetized, I can't say that, guys, anesthetized on animals such as pigs and also shooting experiments on dead animals. He says, yes, the initial calibration of the gelatin that I described previously of necessity had to be done with live and anesthetized animals. It can't be done any other way. If you want to calibrate a gelatin tissue stimulant against living tissue, you have to have your baseline in living tissue. Otherwise, you don't have a scientifically valid thing. I did a few experiments at Letterman Army Institute with 200 pounds that were under anesthesia, but the majority of my work with animals was done at the French Army Hospital in Marseille, France. We had a collaborative research project, and for the last 6 years that I was of our laboratory at Letterman, ending in 1991, I would spend approximately a month in the spring and a month in the fall in Marseille, and there we would do studies with living anesthetized pigs so that we did certainly over 100 shots there. So the majority of this material I did with living pigs was done over in France. And in the research that you have done over the years, I think you've already indicated is directly applicable to shotgun wounds such as the ones that are involved in this case. Well, yes, certainly. I've done work with shotguns because they're fairly common, but additionally, there's another reason. The military, in financing me to and the laboratory for 10 years, their goal was to aim at what happens on the field of battle. And that was my first goal also. And so in Vietnam, what I saw and my colleagues saw was 20% of the casualty was hit by rifle fire, and 80% were injured by fragments from explosive devices. Now, the shotgun in an excellent way to study the shotgun is an excellent way to study these effects because the shotgun is very similar to the explosive device. Explosive devices explode and sends out fragments in every direction. A shotgun, when it explodes, sends them out in only one direction. However, they do spread out with distance. So by varying the distance, you can vary the velocity with which they hit and the distance they are apart. And so, actually, I've used the studies with shotguns to explain to the combat surgeons the mechanism of wounds with explosive devices, and I use the shotgun analogy and a wound profile of the shotgun in the NATO War Surgery Manual, where I wrote the chapter on the subject. Like I said, he's the GOAT. He's the original gangsta of wound ballistics. So let me show you. I want to get some clarification on the mechanics here that led to the break in Mr. Menendez's left leg, and also how the fact that this appears to be, I think you've testified, primarily a wound caused by cavitation supports the notion that neither the artery nor any other major vessel was harmed in the course of this wound being inflicted. So I put up on the board X-ray the photographic X-ray evidence 176, which is of Mr. Menendez's leg. Yes. If you could use that to, yes, I shall. Clarify the nature of that break and why it supports the notion that the artery was not severed. Actually, if you look at this break, it looks like it may be fairly complex, but it's really not. It's a simple break. There's one fragment, two fragments, and of course, we have this foreshortening again, which we described before, and then we have one separate fragment here, and you can see the anatomy and these fragments, how they would fit together, and it's a fairly simple fragment, simple break, which is characteristic of what you see with breaks from temporary cavitation as opposed to actually being hit as we showed yesterday. You see a few very tiny little flakes of lead in here, and that's why I say what I think happened is this shot column, which was all together in order to give enough temporary cavity size to break that leg. The shot column would have to have been all acting as one projectile all together. I think it scraped a little bit along the bone, enough to scrape off a few of these very, very tiny little fragments. We see no substantial fragments in there. And this, unless this went through at an angle where it absolutely hit the vessel and the vessel is in the tissue somewhere going through here. But if you look at it in a three-dimensional view, you could see that you would have to have it just, the trajectory hitting the vessel in order to break the vessel. What the hell is he talking about? And here, but you could easily break the bone without, if you were anywhere near the area, but this stretch would certainly not break the vessel. It just didn't happen. In fact, in that 1962 text that you have referred to, it indicates specifically, does it not, with reference to thigh wounds, that the cavity and temporary cavity pushes the vessel aside, and because these vessels are very elastic, they just stretch away and don't break? That's right. The characteristics of elasticity is probably the most important one as far as the resistance of tissue to be harmed by cavitation. All cavitation is, as I have tried to describe it, as a splash, but basically it's if you take a projectile, goes on through, time-wise, the cavity comes later, on high speed photography, sort of like the wake of a ship. And that's a good way to describe it to make you kind of understand. It comes a few millisecond. Its maximum is maybe a millisecond after the projectile goes through, but as the bullet or bullets go through, they make a permanent cavity. Actually, they make a hole. Then the temporary cavity is this hole stretching its walls outward temporarily and then coming back. There are certain substances in which the temporary cavity remains permanent like that. For instance, clay, which is totally non-elastic, clay will be splashed aside and the temporary cavity remains permanent because it doesn't come back. And most tissue, it comes back, but elasticity is the most important characteristic to predict whether or not a certain tissue will be harmed, and large blood vessels are extremely elastic. There you have it. Okay. So, was there any additional research that you conducted that indicated that there is another phenomenon having to do with constriction of these vessels, even if they are torn, that shuts off bleeding? Yes, this is something that is not has not been well recognized, and we saw it in France when we did a study with the newest Russian assault rifle weapon, which went through the hind leg and the thigh area of a 200-pound pig, and these pigs were under anesthesia, and we held the pig up and shot through them. And this projectile caused a cavity about the size of a cantaloupe, and one the one that we were talking about. And in every case, we found a phenomenon that was very interesting. In the first place, we found these torn exit wounds, which were, they measure maybe 6 inches across, actually some larger than what we see here on Mr. Menendez, and in no case was there blood gushing out of these wounds. There'd be a little trickle down at the bottom from the very small vessels, but the large vessels weren't bleeding. And another interesting thing was that we noted if you looked at the skin around the vessel, around the hole, it was blanched. It was white, which indicated it wasn't getting any blood supply. And this is very important for training of the military because commonly the combat surgeon is taught when you see a wound, one way to tell dead tissue from living tissue is if it bleeds or not when you cut it. So very frequently, as you're cutting tissue, and there's again, as I tried to explain yesterday, there's a line between the healthy tissue and the tissue that's obviously badly mangled, must come out. But there's a point there at which where the tissue is going to be living healthy tissue, and then the tissue that will not survive. Not Now, if you use the guideline of cutting until it bleeds, then that what we would say is all this white area. If you see this casualty, you would have to cut all that white area out because if you see this as casualty, I guess, You would have to cut all the white area out because obviously it's not going to bleed, it's not getting any blood supply. But that doesn't mean that it's dead tissue or dying tissue. However, what we did is we were puzzled by this phenomenon because it had never been described before. So what we did is we wanted to see how long it would last. Half of the pigs that we operated on half the pigs and did fairly large resection, and the other half we didn't operate on at all and just saw how nature's defense mechanisms would handle it. Oh, that's awful. And we noted that in our protocol that we'd set up what was to do the operation immediately within 15 minutes of the time that we did the shots, and then we'd change the dressing the next day. We noticed when you changed the dressing the next day on the ones that we hadn't operated on, the white areas, the areas that had been white were no longer white. So we said, well, we'll study this. So we took one pig, an extra pig, and shot the pig, and she asks if it was under anesthesia. He says, of course. Anything, we didn't shoot anything that wasn't under anesthesia. We looked at this white area, photographed it, and didn't touch it. Let the pig be under anesthesia with the legs strung up for 3 hours. Later, took another photograph, and the witnesses had, as and the witness, the whiteness had gone. So it's a temporary phenomenon of a spasm of a local blood vessel secondary to being stretched violently. The body defense mechanisms have the capacity to clamp blood vessels down so they won't bleed. This really explains a lot of things. For instance, the layman tends to be very surprised by the fact that a person whose leg has been blown off will come in and they won't be bleeding to death. If you look at a sharp knife and cut the leg off the person, if you took a sharp knife and cut the leg off of a person, the person would bleed to death in minutes. But when the leg gets blown off by an explosive device, it doesn't bleed. It's the same phenomenon. That's crazy and wild that your body reacts differently like that. All right, anyways. Is it, therefore, layman thinking to think that if you cut your finger and it bleeds, that this wound to Mr. Menendez's left leg should have been bleeding a lot? Is that layman thinking? Well, it would be, yes, but based on everything I've seen on the field of battle and documented experimentally, I would not expect to see anything. Maybe a small trickle of blood coming out of this, but certainly nothing major, unless the vessel has been actually cut. And even if the vessel had been cut, well, even if the vessel had been cut, the vessel may not be bleeding. Yes, I have seen a case. Does that have to do with the pig experiment? On the one hand, if the vessel is not cut because this is a cavity caused, the vessel moves aside in the temporary cavity? He says yes. That's one reason it couldn't be bleeding. Is that correct? Yes. Is a second reason why it might not be bleeding this phenomenon that you were seeing in France that the vessels constrict and shut themselves off. That certainly could explain it. And my first experience with this came when I was a medical student rotating through the surgery service. We had a fellow who was a garbage collector and he was throwing a garbage can up over a conveyor belt and his arm got caught and it got torn off, except for just a very small volume of skin and a very little bit of muscle. The arm was completely gone. This fellow came in and we opened the wound and looked at it, and sitting there in the wound was the axillary artery, the brachial artery going to the arm, which is an artery probably about the size of this pencil. And the end of it was just sitting there with a clot in it. You could see the pulsation. You could see the artery moving with the pulsation, but it wasn't bleeding at all. This guy is graphic in his descriptions when he talks about medical stuff. Wish you would explain some of his answers better, because he kind of like is wishy-washy. He starts an answer, then changes his answer, then changes it to something else. The way he's stating things, he changes it. Anyways. Next, now because or based on all the experimentation that you have done with ballistics and with wound ballistics, Dr. Fackler, do you have an opinion about this question? If Mr. Menendez had been seated on the couch the way failure analysis tries to suggest in their diagrams at the time that he received that leg wound, would you expect there to be some physical evidence that a shot column had gone through that leg along a reasonable trajectory from that wound? Well, yes. In answer to your question, certainly the shot column that came through the leg came through as a single shot column and probably didn't lose a great deal of velocity in going through, and it would come out with a great deal of force, and it had to it had to do something. It had to go somewhere. It had to hit something. It just doesn't evaporate. That certainly is true. Can you see the photographs on this exhibit 304 that have been marked? Well, first of all, let me just direct your attention to the illustrations D and E. For one thing, do you understand that the trajectory that is suggested in these illustrations requires someone to be shooting at that leg from behind the couch in something like the angle shown? Now, do you have an opinion based on the wound and the alignment of the entry and exit wounds as to whether that trajectory is reasonably probable? Yes, the trajectory doesn't make any sense because of the angle of that wound across Mr. Menendez's leg. That is within about 10 degrees of actually perpendicular to the long bone of the leg. It's certainly not angled anywhere near the way it's angled in these photographs. And as a matter of fact, in the autopsy report, Dr. Golden has measured the distance from the heel to each of these wounds, and there's 1 inch difference between the two, and a 1 inch difference across about a 5 inch leg gives you 11 degrees. So it's certainly no more than 11 degrees of an angle, is what he's saying. And this is depicted here as this is like a 45-degree angle from the long axis of the femur, and that certainly doesn't happen. So it doesn't line up with the evidence. These failure analysis diagrams that the state has entered are garbage and probably never should have come in. But I guess that's for the jury to decide if they're garbage or not. In order for someone behind the couch, first of all, is it even conceivable that someone could inflict wounds that with an 11-degree angle from a position behind the couch? No, they'd have to be over, and they'd have to be over behind the couch as it extends around. Well, the couch is an L-shaped couch. If they were behind this portion of the couch, yes. And then they'd have to get the shot low enough to be straight on with the leg. Yes, that would be a possibility, but certainly not from there. And the problem with the shot from this part of the couch is it puts the gun too far away from the leg to explain the shot column being as close together as it would have to be caused by to have caused that wound. That does appear to be a wound that's caused within a few feet. And I would say no more than 3, probably. So you can't have the muzzle of the gun many feet away on the other side of the couch and produce this shot column wound. Is that correct? That's correct. So this trajectory shown in those illustrations is wrong, correct? Correct. Now, in addition to that, do you see these photographs following this notion what we now know is wrong? But in any event, if you follow this wrong-headed trajectory to its terminus, that would be an area you can see how the carpet pattern lines up. That would be an area on the carpet that's depicted in F, G, and H. And are you aware of the fact that absolutely no ballistic or blood or tissue matter was observed or is observable in those areas? Well, yes, I note that. But the thing that I would expect to be much more certain evidence than tissue fragments would be the pellets. I said ballistics evidence. There's no pellets there? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the pellets. The pellets are coming out of there at quite a rapid speed and they'd have to go somewhere. they would certainly go through this rug, and this is a hardwood floor. They'd probably go into the hardwood floor, and there's no evidence whatsoever. Oh, sorry, this is I'm just reading straight straight through. Well, because his answers seem to be rambling, and so sometimes I think that her question is still him rambling. So apologies. She asks, and there's no evidence whatsoever of any pellet damage in that area to the left of your to the best of your observation, is probably what the reporter meant to say there. He says, best of my knowledge, there's not. Now, in addition to pellets coming out of the wound like that, you expect would you expect blood to be coming out? God, I can't talk. I need a sip of water and a tongue rest for just a second. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Next question. Now, in addition to pellets coming out and the wound like that, would you expect blood to be coming out? You'd expect some blood spray, yes. Similar to what we saw in Mr. Menendez's left arm as the spray of the wound to his right arm? Yes, I think that's an excellent analogy. Even though there's certain amount of blood, we're talking about the spasm and everything, but there's a certain amount of blood in the extremity when it's hit. This is where the blood spatter would come from, and then the clamping down would come very shortly. But there would be a certain amount, and you would certainly expect to see some blood spatter in the direction of the path of the bullet. And there is no blood spatter in the direction of the path of the bullet as imagined by failure analysis, correct? No, you don't see anything. Oh, I wanted to show you something else, Dr. Fackler. These were two exhibits marked by Dr. Lawrence, and you did read Dr. Lawrence's testimony, did you not? I did. First of all, I want to show you what's been marked 208. This is a photograph, a duplicate of which appeared on let me just get the number. Your Honor, we discovered yesterday there's a reason why this doesn't have a number on the front. This doesn't have a number, period. The court says, okay, you failed to ask it to be marked as an exhibit. She says, I certainly did. Court says it has since been marked as 319. This one is 319? Yes. All right, she next says, this is the board that has a number of photographs that has the number 8 in the upper right corner. Let me take this back for a minute. Okay, just for a moment, this is chart 319, and calling your attention to photograph A. In 319, the photograph on the couch, do you see on the cushion immediately adjacent to the cushion where the body of Mrs. Menendez was found, there are two numbers, 4 and 6? Yes. And do you see immediately to the right of the number 6 an object? They're probably like those little police markers, the little yellow markers. Yes, I do. Yeah. And did you observe that object under a magnifying glass and in other methods in studying these photographs? Yes, in this photograph and a few others I studied under magnification every time we have it, which is at least one other, maybe two others. And what, in the best of your opinion, what does that matter appear to be? It certainly appears to be brain tissue. And this is brain tissue sitting right in the middle, is it not, or thereabouts, of the cushion upon which Dr. McCarthy imagines Mrs. Menendez is sitting while Mr. Menendez is receiving the shot to the back of the head. Objection, argumentative, misstates the testimony, sustained as to the form of the question. You're familiar with what what Mr. McCarthy, she calls him Mr., called shot number 2, which is the shot to the back of Mr. Menendez's head. Yes. And you're familiar, this is his illustrated version, Dr. McCarthy's. Yes. Do you see what's supposed to be Mrs. Menendez is sitting on the couch when that's happening? What's supposed to be Mrs. Menendez sitting on the couch when that's happening? Yes. And is this piece of brain matter sitting on the couch where she's supposed to be according to this illustration? Yes, it is. Now I want to show you therefore what Dr. Lawrence marked some areas on 208, which is an identical photograph as A on 319. Yes, you see that? And he was making a mark, in fact, that was supposed to encompass where Mrs. Menendez was sitting. Yes. And has he included that piece of brain material as the area where she's supposedly sitting? Yes. So how is that even possible? Is it conceivable that that piece of brain material could have hit the cushion of the couch if she was sitting on the couch at the time on the couch cushion? No. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, Dr. Fackler, is this photograph which Dr. Lawrence brought from Stockton, and it's marked 211. Do you recall Dr. Lawrence's testimony that at one time in his experience, he had been, quote, fooled by a shotgun wound and originally in observing it, formed the opinion that it was a postmortem wound? Yes, I recall that. And you're looking at that photograph of the wound. Dr. Fackler, based on your experience, is there any reason that you can see in that photograph why you would consider that even preliminary as postmortem? Certainly doesn't. Well, no, actually, the subcutaneous tissue has a lot of small punctate holes. I mean, small punctate areas of bleeding, which is the hallmark of an antemortem wound. So I can't for the life of me see why anybody would think this is postmortem. Wow. Shots fired. Shots fired at Dr. Lawrence. So that wound wouldn't have fooled you? No. I have nothing further. The court says, all right, we'll take a recess and then we'll have our cross examination at 5 minutes after the hour. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions. Blah, 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 blah. We'll continue on because it's only been 45 minutes, so we'll go a little longer. The court says, okay, the defendants are in court. All lawyers, let's get the jury out. Jury enters the courtroom. The following proceedings are held. The court says the jury is in court. You may cross-examine the witness. Mr. Khan will be doing the cross-examining for the state. All right, so Dr. Khan says, Doctor, is it your testimony that the shots inflicted in this case do not cause or did not cause the victims any pain? No. Is that your purpose of testifying to the fact that gunshot wounds commonly do not cause any pain at all, to give the jury the impression that these victims did not suffer any pain? Objection, argumentative. Objection sustained, and it should be because that is just wrong. But I told you they were going to try to do that, try to twist it like, well, I didn't necessarily say they were going to try to twist it, but I pointed out that that was a good point that he made on the stand about the whole no pain thing. And now, of course, he's going to be scrutinized for it. But that's the way it goes when you are a witness. Mr. Khan says, so how many of the wounds that were inflicted in this case, doctor, in your opinion, were painful to the victims? Objection calls for speculation. Overruled. The witness says, well, it's difficult to say. I can only relate to you the experience of wartime and policemen who are shot in the line of duty who recall many times they didn't have pain from gunshot wounds, and it's rare that they would have severe pain. It's rare that they would have severe pain. Do you think that the wound to the left elbow of Jose Menendez would have been a painful wound? Unlikely. Don't ask something you don't want the answer to. Unlikely that would have been painful. Yes, yes, immediately painful. I have talked to people who have shot themselves, firearms examiners, for instance, who have accidentally shot themselves while examining a gun, and they look and they felt no pain for about 2 hours, and then it gets very painful. 2 hours? No pain for 2 hours? Doctor, have you spoke, but not immediately. Have you spoken to people who have cut their finger from time to time? Well, I've cut my own finger from time to time. And have you received reports from people who, such as I'm sure in this courtroom, have cut their finger from time to time and felt a great deal of pain? Objection calls for speculation that he had reports from people. Rephrase the question, says the court. Mr. Khan says, have you ever received reports from people who have suffered minor cuts? I don't think I get reports from minor cuts. No, that's not his specialty. Is it your understanding that minor cuts cause pain? Very frequently they do. But massive gunshot wounds such as these, in this case, they don't cause pain? I know it seems kind of counterintuitive, but that is the case. Yes. So it's your opinion, doctor, the larger the wound, the less pain. Is that correct? No, I didn't make any linear relationship. You said that you can't predict how people would respond to shots inflicted upon them since they do not respond to pain. Is that what you said? Objection misstates the testimony. Sustained. Did you say that you cannot predict how people would respond to shotgun wounds? Yes. And why is that? Well, because you can't predict how people will respond to anything. But can you accept certain instances? I'll give you certain instances that you can't predict it. If a person puts his hand on a hot stove and burns his hand, this person will withdraw his hand. So in that instance, it's predictable. I maintain it is not predictable how a person will respond to a gunshot wound unless the wound happens to be as the one to the back of Mr. Menendez's head, where there will be no reaction. There will be immediate death. Now, that's all predictable, or that's also predictable. But the great majority of gunshot wounds, how a person will react to them, is not predictable. Is it not predictable that a person who is being shot to death would respond in some defensive manner? Well, I don't know how the person would know they were being shot to death in the first place if that's the part of the question that you think is most imperative. Picking apart his semantics and stuff. It's great. I love an expert witness that can hold his own against cross examination, and this is already starting to be fun. I like it. All right. He continues on. It's sort of a double question. I mean, if you could rephrase it in two questions, I think I could answer it easier. Do you think that a person would respond to being shot with a shotgun in some defensive manner? They might, and they might not. So you have no opinion one way or the other as to whether such a person might be more likely to respond to a shot being fired at him. A person might respond by shock and surprise and be stunned and frozen. That's a very common way people would respond to a something where they felt their lives were being in danger. They might rotate their body and try to escape. This is a very common response that I've run across in many cases that I've testified where in a police gunfight, a person will be hit once and then rotate the body rapidly to run the opposite direction. That's a common way of responding. Damn, he gave a really good answer and both of those pretty much help the defense. So do you think it's equally possible that in this case, if Jose Menendez was shot in the leg, sorry, in the left elbow, that he might have just continued sitting there watching television? Well, he might have sat there for, out of shock and not knowing and surprise, he could have well have sat there for a few seconds. He might have moved after that. We're getting into an area here that I can't predict and no one in this world can predict. Do you think that broken bones are painful? From shotgun wounds from explosive devices, immediately they are not. He's already effing told you this, sir. So, even for those wounds in this case that involve fractures, such as we've seen here in the x rays, it's your opinion that they too would not be painful. It's my opinion and solidly supported by the medical literature which I have cited to you. It's not my opinion. It's based on studies done by very eminent people starting with the Second World War and some even before. Take that, Mr. Khan. I like his sassy answers. Can you point to any of the wounds in this case, doctor, that might have caused the victims in this case a little pain? Any of these wounds, except the one to Mr. Menendez's head, could have caused him a little pain. Just a little? As I say, I'm trying to do is to present to you the evidence that has been gathered and very solidly attested to, which tends to correct the common misconception of the layman that wounds of this type are uniformly painful. He's not being evasive. He's being very straight up with his answer. This guy, Mr. Khan is being combative, and he's not. He's just like, you know what? I'm just telling you the facts, man. This is what I know. This is my expertise. I'm telling you what I know. I've looked at everything objectively. Here's my opinion. And I like it because he's not going to budge. How about the multiple fractures to the head of Kitty Menendez? Do you think that might have hurt a little? Objection misstates the testimony. There's been no testimony of fractures to the head. Rephrase the question. Looking at the x-rays of the skull of Kitty Menendez, did you notice anything in her head that might have caused her a little pain? A little pain? All of the shots might have caused her a little pain. Well, what was the condition of her skull as it appeared in the x-rays? I don't quite understand what you mean by the condition of the skull. Was it perfectly intact? Of course not. Okay. Then perhaps you can tell us what was the condition of the skull? Well, there were multiple facial fractures and there were a few fractures at the base of the skull. That's what I'm referring to, doctor. Do you think that might have caused a little pain? That probably wouldn't have. No. So it's your opinion that you can fracture a person's skull and that wouldn't cause them any pain? If it's in combination with a gun with gunfire, that also goes in and disrupts the basal portions of the brain, like the contact wound to her cheek, certainly, because the areas of the brain the receptive or the that receive the pain the areas of the brain that receive the pain are no longer operative. So, of course, there wouldn't be any pain. Mic drop. That was like, no, I already told you there's not going to be any pain. But if you really want me to get into it and fire back at you, I'm going to tell you why she didn't feel any pain. She can't. Medically, she wouldn't be able to. It's just, there it is. So you feel that this was essentially a painless crime? I'm going to object, Your Honor. That's argumentative. Overruled. No, I never said that. No. Now, have you spoken to a lot? I understand that you treated a lot of projectile wounds. Is that correct? Yes, I have. Did you also speak to people who received gunshot wounds? Gunshot wounds are projectile wounds. Yet another. You don't want to get overpowered by the witness you're crossing, and that has happened so far already to or Mr. Khan, and I'm here for it. Did you speak to people who received shotgun wounds? Yes. And did they report to you feeling no pain at the time of the shot? I'm not sure how many times I've talked to and asked this question, asked and answered that question. I have not. Let me see. The case I testified on recently on a shotgun wound, I didn't get a chance to speak to the defendant, although he was living, but that did not come out in the case. So, no, I don't know. So, did you ever ask a person who had been shot by a shotgun whether that caused him any pain whatsoever? I don't believe I've ever asked a person who's been shot with a shotgun that question. Did you ever see any signs from people that you've treated for shotgun wounds that perhaps maybe it hurt a little bit? Well, the treatment hurts. I mean, and after the fact, almost everyone after the fact will suffer pain. But there seems to be something about the immediate rapidity of the projectile and possibly its cavitation and the stretching of the nerves that makes them inoperative for a short period of time. I can't explain the mechanisms of it. I don't think it's ever been worked out. But certainly, many of these cases that I'm speaking of that don't have immediate pain suffer an hour or two, certainly have pain. So it's delayed pain. He's not saying that they don't have pain, but Kitty and Jose were not alive long enough to feel that pain if it is a delayed pain. So does the size of the projectile have any bearing upon the amount of pain? I'm unaware of any. So when you shoot someone with a shotgun from a distance, it creates a very large cavitation inside their body. Excuse me? When you shoot a person with a shotgun, further distance away increases the size of the cavitation. Is that correct? No, just the opposite. It gets smaller the further you get away. The further you get away, the smaller the cavitation. And why is that? The maximum cavitation with a shotgun is caused with the shot column not when the shot column has not yet spread. Its angle as one large it's acting as one large projectile. That's where you get the maximum cavitation. Then, as you get out of a ways, as the projectiles spread, each one of these projectiles has a small amount of cavitation, but it doesn't act like the single large projectile. So you get less cavitation as you get further away. When you shoot a person from a distance with a shotgun, it creates a bigger hole in a body than shooting him up close. Is that correct? Excuse me? Can you restate that? Yes. What is the difference in terms of the hole created in the body when you shoot a person with a shotgun up close as opposed to far away? Up close, you get one large hole. Far away, you get many small holes. If you shoot a person in between those two, isn't there a point where you get larger holes? Ms. Amerson says, I'm going to object to the question as vague, overruled. Do you understand the question? The witness says, I'd prefer the question if it could be stated in feet. I could answer it much easier. The court says, okay. Mr. Khan says, all right, let's try that. At 6 feet away, what size hole does a shotgun pellet or shotgun shooting impact upon the body? What is the size of the hole to the body? Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm going to object to the question as calling for speculation. There's not any facts there. Court says, Are you able to answer that just in general, or do you need to know the size of the shot? The witness says, Yeah, the portion of the body hit and the size of the shot and the gauge and a few other things would be helpful. Mr. Khan says, Let's use the same type of ammunition, referring to the same type of ammunition used in this case. Birdshot or buckshot? Buckshot. From 6 feet away, what type of impact would that have on the human body? From 6 feet away, the projectiles would probably be spread. Oh, to the distance between the two, the extent of the wound, if measured, would be probably about 1.5 to 2 inches. This would vary some, but I think that's a good approximation. Now, does that mean that it makes a 2-inch hole through the body as it passes through? In the entrance side. And what happens after it hits the entrance side? Well, then the shot pellets tend to spread. And how does that impact upon the body? Well, it makes small holes instead of one large one. And how does it come out of the body? Ordinarily, if it does come out, it comes out in multiple small holes depending on the size of the body. If you're talking about a shot through the arm, it would tend not to change much because the distance traveled may only be 1.5 or 2 inches. But if you're talking about through a torso, which is 6, 7, 8 inches, then there'd be considerable difference. And how about from 12 feet? If you fired the same type of ammunition from 12 feet away, can you tell us how that will impact upon the body? It'll probably be about double what you get from 6 feet, everything else being equal. That is, that the entrance will be about 3 to 4 inches. That's about it, yes. And that means a hole actually 3 to 4 inches in size. Is that correct? No, no. At 12 feet, that means multiple small holes, and the distance between the two most widely spread small projectiles would be that distance. So when you said it creates the same thing only twice as in size, you were earlier referring to a single hole 1/2 inch to 2 inches in size. Is that correct? Well, not, no, I'm sorry. Ms. Abrams says, objection, Your Honor. That misstates the testimony. It was 1.5 inches. The court says, all right, why don't you rephrase the question? Yes, Mr. Khan says, when I asked you about the entry at 6 feet, you said that that would create a hole, an entry hole, about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. Is that correct? Okay, I probably should not. I probably should have added an addendum to clarify that, meaning that they might not all be in the same hole when you get that far spread apart. So in other words, you could have some satellite holes where I thought you were talking about the spread of the shot column, and I was talking about the spread of the shot column in all of those, and whether or not they would be a single hole at 6 feet. You get to the point where we're looking at maybe one major hole and several small holes. When you say one major hole, you're saying that one shot would tend to create one solid hole in the body, perhaps with some satellites? It would be likely. There would also be possibly patterns that most everyone would be an individual. It's very difficult. Just depends on the random distribution. Say if you get half a dozen shot happen to line up and make one hole. That would be a fairly large hole, and then several other ones on the side. And there's a point at which, say, at 2 feet, you almost always have one hole. And then at 10 feet, or 12 feet, you would most commonly have individual holes. So there's a random variation between those two distances as the shot column spreads, it will appear, how many holes it will make. Okay, what is the distance at which you no longer have one hole, but you begin to have satellite defects? This can be anywhere, usually 3 to 5 feet ordinarily. And what is the distance at which you no longer have a single hole, but you have all separate pellet defects? Well, certainly out at 15 or 20 feet, that would be the case. But again, it might not be totally the case because out at that distance, you could have two together. You could have two striking right together, or maybe even possibly three striking together. It's a random spread. And so if you took a piece of paper and put it up 20 feet and shot 20 shots through it, now most of them would be individual holes, but I'm sure you'd probably find maybe one where uh, three shot, find one maybe where three shot happened together. I think that's supposed to be there. That's what's throwing me off. I love it I mean, it's hard enough to read people's spoken language because they don't speak like a normal sentence. And when you've got it all typed in capital letters and very little punctuation, that's also garbage to read. So, and then you've got the person typing this up, putting in, or misspelling things. I think that word was supposed to be there. He says, I'm not sure you'd probably find one maybe where their shot happened to hit together, and there'd be several where two shot happened to hit together. It's just a random distribution. So he's just saying, like, some may still hit together even if you're 20 feet out. Which is a long way of explaining that. So, directing your attention to the wound of the left leg of Mr. Jose Menendez, what shot was that distance fired from? The left leg of Jose Menendez, let me see. I just want to make sure we get the right shot here. I think there was only one to his left leg, but You're talking about the shot from the autopsy report, number 5, the left thigh, through and through wound, no projectile recovered? Yes, there was just one wound to his left leg. Is that correct? Yes, I just wanted to make sure. You want to know the distance that was fired from? Yes. My estimate would be anywhere from probably about 3 to 5 feet. Could be a little further. Now, you reviewed the testimony of Dr. McCarthy. Is that correct? Not all of it. I reviewed some of it. Some of it was sent to me, and then I think there was a day then I missed when because I was traveling. All right. And did you read the part where he spoke about experiments that he conducted using a Mossberg shotgun in trying to ascertain reliable, verifiable results concerning shotgun pellet spread for the purpose of reconstructing this crime? Yes, I received those target copies, target copies of the targets. Did you feel that, contrary to what he was testifying to in court, you are able to give estimates even without conducting any experiments of your own? I'm giving rough estimates. I'm not saying I can say it within 1 foot. The wound to the back of Jose Menendez's head, how far was it shot? How far was that shot fired from his head? Your Honor, I'm going to object as beyond the scope with this witness. Overruled. The witness says, my understanding is that was a contact wound. Mr. Khan says, is that what your understanding or your opinion? That's what I think it's probably stated as thus in the autopsy. I really haven't concentrated much on that wound, but I'd be happy to refer to the autopsy and see. Well, I'm asking you if you have an opinion concerning that. I have always thought it was a contact wound because I thought I read that in the autopsy. It was extremely close if it wasn't actual contact. Yes, it says a contact type abrasion. And the other thing we have with that wound is that we have a widely spread satellite entrance wound, which would indicate that powder gases probably entered into the formation of that wound also. The wound to Jose Menendez's left elbow, how far away was that shot fired from? The left elbow. From the spread, it's difficult to say. I would say something in the neighborhood of 14 feet. And how do you come up with a specific distance like 14 feet? I don't. I said in the neighborhood of. And what is that? What is the variation there? Okay, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 14 feet plus or minus 4 feet if you want to be exact about it. And how many wounds, how many separate shotgun wounds did Jose Menendez suffer to his right arm? To his right arm? Yes, at least 2. What were the entrance and exits of each of those wounds that you're referring to? The major wound is the one that entered in the back of the arm and came forward, entered laterally, and came medially, and it's the one that caused the bruising of the chest. And the other was probably an entrance coming from the near the antecubital fossa where there was more spread of individual pellets and, as I say, entrance coming from the right and going out coming from the left, going out the right. Went out that part of the right arm? That was near the antecubital fossa, but the arm is somewhat distorted because of the break and it's difficult to say, but it's near the bend of the elbow. You're referring to your left arm. The wound you're describing was to his right arm. I'm sorry, I was referring to the antecubital fossa as the bend. I'm sorry, I used the wrong arm. I rolled my eyes when I said that. He probably didn't, but he probably wanted to. The antecubital fossa was the entry, is that correct? It appears to be yes. Where was the exit? The other side of the arm. Where specifically? Well, I'd have to look at the photographs, but I think or the autopsy. I can't recall every one of the wounds from memory, but I'd be happy to look them up. Let me show you a photograph that has been marked as 183. I'd like to put this on the board at this time. Can you see in that photograph the exit from the entry wound? Can you see the exit from the entry wound? Why don't you just say, can you see the exit wound? No, that it would be the exits. No, the exits would be on the other side of the arm. This would be one of the entrances up here, it appears, and the exits would be on the other side. So they're not, the exits aren't pictured in that photograph. Okay, let me show you at the bottom of the photograph, there appears to be a large wound, which is appears to be separate from the largest wound to the arm on the front side of the arm. It appears to be separated by a little piece of skin. You see that? Yes. Okay, that wound at the bottom that I'm pointing to now, was that part of the exit for the wound for the pellet defects in the antecubital fossa? No, I believe that was the entrance for the exit coming out here of the large wound. So you're telling us here that in addition to the large wound that we see here, and in addition to the small wound that we see separated by the small piece of skin, there are more exits on the back of the arm? Well, I believe so. I think they're described in the autopsy. Can you show us a picture of those? I don't think I saw a picture of the back of the arm, but I think they're described in the autopsy. You told counsel you received every photograph in this case. Is that correct? Well, I received a great number of photographs, and I assume that counsel sent me every photograph. Did you look to see if there was a photograph of this exit that you're describing? I'm not sure. This is not a wound I specifically concentrated on. I really didn't, it was not in any great dispute that I thought. So it's not something I really concentrated on. I haven't spent a lot of time looking for exits for this particular entrance wound you pointed out. How do you know what the dispute is in this case? How do I know what the dispute is in this case? Yes. Just from reading Dr. McCarthy's report, which claims a lot of things, and my understanding is that the defense is disputing many of the portions of that report, and I don't recall this was a particular point of dispute. That's like the right answer, but I think he was fishing for like, is the defense feeding you like information what you should be looking at? When obviously that's not the case, and obviously he's a professional expert and has done this before, and he's like, look, I evaluated the evidence, I read the testimony, I figured out for myself what was in dispute. It's not that difficult, sir. Are you telling us, doctor, that you didn't realize that the wounds to the right arm of Jose Menendez was one of the most disputed wounds in this case? Objection, argumentative. Rephrase the question. You were never told at any time that the wounds to the right arm of Jose Menendez were in dispute. Objection argumentative and calls for hearsay. Overruled. You misstated what I told you. I in no way said that. We're talking about two wounds. The big dispute was on the large wound, the fairly short range wound where you have a blown out entrance and exit. Then there's another wound, at least one other wound. There's probably more than one other wound. There's some scattered pellets, and I was unaware of any big dispute on those. Mr. Khan says, didn't you realize from reading the autopsy report that even Dr. Golden changed his opinion concerning what was the entrance and what was the exit wound on the arm? Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. As phrased, it's argumentative. Mr. Khan says, did you note from reading the reports of Dr. Golden that he had changed his opinions from 1989 to 95 concerning the wounds of that arm? Your Honor, I'm going to object. That assumes facts, not an evidence, calls for hearsay, and it's not what's contained in the reports misstates what we've heard about the reports. The court says, okay, counsel, you are arguing, and the simple objection is what? Assumes facts, not an evidence, Your Honor. Object to those grounds. The court says, in the future, if you have an objection, say that, nothing more, unless I invite further comment. Objection sustained to the form of the question. What a jerk. He's such a jerk. Mr. Khan says, okay, did you notice any discrepancy concerning Dr. Golden's description of the wounds in the right arm between his 89 report and his 95 report? Well, of course, the latter report was made to point out a change in his opinion. And what change did you note between those reports? I'd be happy to look it up for you. On the amended report, he says that the subsequent autopsy shows that the wound tract is through the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and muscle passing from lateral to medial. So he says, and this is the large one from lateral to medial. Now you're asking specifically about the individual entrance from the other wounds. Is that true? No, doctor. Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object. Counsel is misleading the witness. Overruled. I'm asking you to explain to the jury, as simple as you can, what was the deviation, what was the change from the 89 report to the 95 report concerning the wounds to the right arm of Jose Menendez. Ms. Abramson says, well, I'm going to object. Calls for conclusion on the part of the witness. Overruled. The witness says, this will take a while. I'm going to have to read the previous report and then compare it with the other. And he does so. His confidence is just like, bam, I'm just going to read this. He doesn't even ask. He's just like, I got to read it if you want me to answer this question. So give me a minute. He says, okay, we go to page 5 of the autopsy report and shotgun wound number 3, which is in the lower portion of this page. Paragraphs 1 and 2 should be deleted. Did you wish me to read the paragraphs that were deleted? Mr. Khan says, I want you to summarize for the jury, if you can, what was the change from the 89 report to the 95 report in regard to the wounds to the right arm of Jose Menendez? Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm going to object. Calls for a compound question, or compound answer. Court says overruled. It's asking for this witness's understanding of the modification in the report. The witness says one difference is that in the initial report of 1989, it says 15 individual lead pellets were recovered from along the wound path. This was deleted. Mr. Khan says, do you know from reading the 95 report why Dr. Golden in his 89 report indicated that he recovered 15 lead pellets along a particular wound path, but then in his 95 report he deleted all reference to those pellets? Do I know why he did this? From reading the report, you know why he has deleted all 15 pellets from the 1995 report. Well, I don't think I can know why because he, in the 89 report, they're there, and in the amendment, he says delete the paragraph in which they're located. So what I'm asking you is, so he hasn't explained why, but that's what he's done. He makes no reference as to why he deleted those pages. I'll have to read the entire thing. I'll tell you in a second. So he reads it. I can find no indication in this amendment to the reason that he deleted that paragraph. Okay, so there's one change. 15 pellets deleted without any explanation. Do you see any other deviations from the 1989 report to the 95 report concerning the right arm of Jose Menendez? I'll continue just a second. He continues reading. He adds the following. He adds the fact that it was a single ragged entrance defect, approximately 2 inches in minimum diameter, without any evidence of satellite defect. And I don't find that in the initial report. Oh, in other words, in the 95 report, he adds a brand new entrance wound. Is that correct? Well, he describes it differently, yes. How did he describe that wound, which you have just referred to as an entrance wound, in the 89 report? One of the difficulties here is that we've got 2 wounds and they were mixed together, and I recall reading the initial report and I was very confused by the difference between the 2, and I think what he's trying to do here is straighten the 2 out. So it's not just the 1, but there's 2. What are the 2 that you're referring to? The 2 I referred to, one where the shot column is together with the temporary cavity which caused the bruise to the chest. That's one. The other is where a more distant wound has individual pellet marks. Those are the 2 separate wounds. Individual pellet marks striking where? As I described, near the antecubital fossa. By that, Ms. Amerson says, I don't believe the witness had a chance to finish the answer. The court says, had you finished your answer? The witness says, yes. The court says, your next question. Mr. Khan says, aren't there 3 wounds that he's trying to straighten out? Wasn't there a third wound, which he previously described in 89 as a wound entering the dorsal aspect, that is, the outside of the right forearm? Well, there are also wounds, as we can see, there's graze wounds also in the forearm. I'm not talking about graze wounds. I'm asking you if Dr. Golden in 1989 described one of the wounds to the right arm as being a wound to the dorsal aspect of the right forearm consisting of multiple individual pellet wounds averaging approximately 1/4 inch in diameter. Yes. Okay, so in that, a third wound that he is trying, is that a third wound that he's trying to straighten out in the 95 amendment? Well, I thought there were only 2, but it's a very difficult thing to say whether or not there was a third wound because of the individual pellet wound. No one can say for sure that one of the pellet wounds didn't come from one of the shotgun blasts, and the one nearby comes from another wound from 2 separate wounds that are passing nearby. I think that what we're trying to do here is search for minutia that may, in all truth, never really be possible to sort out. Minutia? Doctor, isn't it a fact that Dr. Golden in his 1989 report describes a series of wounds to the dorsal aspect of the right forearm and then in his 95 report eliminates that wound altogether? Objection, Your Honor. It's argumentative. Overruled. He's overruled like everything so far for in favor of the prosecution. The state says, yes, this is true. Mr. Khan says, do you call that minutia, doctor? Objection, argumentative. Overruled? I hate this judge. I really hate this judge. He's getting on my nerves here. So the witness says, I thought of this, and I think we just forgot them. Obviously, they're there, and you can see them. And so we have an entrance wound and we have an exit wound. He forgot them that's my only explanation. Why don't you ask him? Yeah, why don't you call him? Oh, wait, you didn't. That's what I would point out. Dr. Khan or Mr. Khan says, Doctor, are you telling us that in 1989 he wrote a report that he decided to rewrite the report in 95 to get it correct and then forgot to describe wounds that he had previously identified in 89? Objection calls for speculation. Sustained. Oh, finally we get a sustained. Now, in 89, did he remember to write the wound that you are now describing as the entrance wound to the back of the right arm? Objection calls for speculation. Sustained. Do you see a description in the 1989 report of the entrance wound which you are now describing as the ragged defect, 2 inches in maximum diameter to the back of the right arm? Objection, Your Honor, that misstates the testimony. Overruled. I don't see that in the 1989 report. He records it in the same manner as a single ragged wound that comes in the amendment. Okay, so then in 89, he describes the wound to the forearm, which he no longer describes in 95. And in 95, he describes new entrance wounds, which he hasn't described in 89. Is that correct? Ms. Abramson says, objection, misstates the testimony, calls for speculation. Court says, well, it's argumentative as phrased. And that. Now, in addition to those 2 discrepancies, and in addition to 15 lead pellets that can no longer be accounted for, was he consistent in regard to whether this large defect on his right arm was an exit for a particular wound? Ms. Abramson says, objection, Your Honor, compound. The court says, all right, just that portion of the question, starting with was he consistent, is not compound. You can answer the question. The witness says, I can't remember which part of it was, if he could restate it. I'll restate it. What large wound, which you now describe as an exit wound? Yes, I'm going to object, misstates the testimony. That wound is dissected, and that's been established. The court says again, now you're arguing. Shut up, Judge. She's trying to tell you, she's giving you factual reasons why. Well, I guess that's arguing, isn't it? I cannot hate. I cannot stand him. He's getting on my nerves with the latest rulings that he's been doing in this case. Now, I think now that we're getting into the defense's case, we're seeing a little more. We've always seen him lean to the prosecution, but I think we're seeing it a little more now that the defense started their case. Anyways, Miss Abramson says, nope, never mind. The court says rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says yes. Where was the exit wound on the right arm of Jose Menendez for the wound that struck him in the rear of the arm? In the medial portion of his upper arm. And how big was that wound, the exit? Oh, maybe 2.5 inches, approximately 2 to 3 inches. The exit was 2 to 2.5 inches? I think approximately, yes. And what is your source of information for that? The photographs I looked at. The photographs show that exit as being 2 by 2.5 inches. As I recall, I would be happy to review them, but I think that's an approximation, yes. Are you referring? It's a large, blown out exit. Are you referring to this wound? That same objection misstates the testimony, overruled. Mr. Khan says this is a 183. Are you referring to that wound? No, I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to other photographs of that wound that I think has been opened up. And how did you determine, thank you, you may return to your right seat? Yes, thank you. And how did you determine that was 2 by 2.5 inches in size? You conducted your own measurement or you read that somewhere? No, I don't. Well, let me go back here and look. Maybe, yes. Here in the amended report, a single ragged entrance wound about 2 inches maximum diameter. My question is concerning the exit. Yes, exit. And there were several photographs that showed that exit, not that one where I think he dissected it somewhat. If we can find those photographs, I'd be happy to indicate where I got my estimate of approximately 2 inches. Well, let me show you 202 and ask you if this helps you any. That was one of them, only this shows it only partially. There was another one from a different aspect. And did you hold up a scale or something to get the measurement? No, I really didn't concentrate on that until you asked me the measurement. It was, to me, a large blown out exit, maybe 2, 3 inches. Maybe it was larger than that. Well, did you read the reports carefully before you came to court? That is, the autopsy reports in this case. Well, I've read them several times, yes. How many hours did you work on this case? I stopped keeping track, but I think somewhere around 50. And you said that you stopped keeping track when you hit the cap for the ceiling, how much you were being paid. Is that correct? I think it was 5 hours was approved. How many? 5 hours. 5 hours? 5 hours. So you were paid how much in this case? I haven't been paid anything in this case, not yet. I understand I will be paid for 5 hours. Wow. Yet again, this is another limitation to the defense. Could you imagine if this guy didn't testify for the defense and didn't do all this work out of the kindness of his heart? Could you imagine that? Anyways, most of the times that is what happens. You get screwed by the state and you can't afford your experts, or you're only given a certain cap and you can't really put on the defense that you know you could if you had the funds. So he hasn't been paid yet. You expect to get 5 hours at $250 an hour for approximately $1,250. Is that what you expect to get? That's what I was given to understand. That only 5 hours of my time was approved, yes. It's that, if that's not true and more time is approved, that would be nice. I've been told by counsel only 5 hours was approved. And that includes all your testimony here in court. I suppose so. I was told 5 hours was approved. Your Honor, I can't answer the question any better than that. You have to ask counsel. I was under the impression when I came here and when I worked on the entire case that I would have my expenses paid to come out here and go back, but the time would be limited to 5 hours at the hourly rate of $250. That was my expectation, and I have received no information from anyone that has contradicted that. Thorough answer. And you participating in this case for some reason other than the financial aspect of it? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And can you tell us why you're a witness in this case? Absolutely, I'll tell you. I'm doing this as a pro bono for the forensic science community. Bam. He put in a ton of hours on his own for science, for learning the truth, for the justice system, for pushing justice further. That's why he did it. And why are you doing that? To demonstrate the utter fallacies that can arise when a person who might be well respected and highly paid in one field is allowed to go outside of his field completely and testify as an expert in a field in which he totally lacks expertise. Holy mother of Burns. I want to read that again. And why are you doing that? To demonstrate the utter fallacies that can arise when a person who might be well respected and highly paid in one field is allowed to go outside of his field completely and testify as an expert in a field in which he totally lacks expertise. Dr. McCarthy, he's talking to you. And if this is allowed to establish itself as a precedent, I feel that great harm will be done to the forensic science community, and that's why I'm here. He thinks Dr. McCarthy is a danger to the forensic science community. I don't know how you could get a better answer for the defense than that right there. And you're referring to Dr. McCarthy? I certainly am. Wow, he does not mince words. So you have an agenda, is that correct? I think I answered your question. You want to prove something here, is that correct? No, I think I answered your question as completely as I can. He's done with this bullshit. He's like, you're not going to get me on this. You're not going to get me on anything. I'm telling you the truth. That's what it is. So you're here to discredit Dr. McCarthy regardless of what Dr. McCarthy testifies to. Is that correct? Not at all. Not at all. I'm here to point out the errors that Dr. McCarthy has made because he is a layman in the field that he's recognized as an expert, and he made errors that are layman's errors. Now, if Dr. McCarthy can line up wounds with some mathematical certainty, if a layman can show me how certain wounds line up and make sense in a direction in a proportion that I had not considered, fine. If that makes sense, I'd be very happy to accept it after, saying no one can think of everything. But when a person writes a report in which he constantly says this is the way the wounds was without any basis in information, and when he makes statements such as, this would have caused this person to move because the pain would be so great, or this shot would have knocked this person down, or this pellet is in the frontal lobe. All these things are just contrary to the fact and just, frankly, nonsense. I love this witness. He drove me nuts in some of his long winded answers, but my God, he is burning Dr. Khan today. There's fire in the LA County Courthouse. And how do you intend to demonstrate to forensic science community what you accomplished by testifying in this case? How do I intend to demonstrate to the forensic science community? Isn't that what you said? You were going to demonstrate to the forensic science? Objection, he didn't allow the witness to answer and argumentative. The court says the witness was asking a question. The new question clarified it. Let's get another question. Mr. Khan says, yes, how do you intend to demonstrate to the forensic science community what you accomplished in this case by testifying against Dr. McCarthy? I think what the court reporter is taking down in this case will demonstrate it very clearly. He's like, I'm doing my job. The things I'm saying, the way I'm responding to the answers. I'm doing it. Just read. And then you will be able to what? Distribute copies of your testimony and show other people how you were able to discredit Dr. McCarthy? No, I don't have a vendetta against Dr. McCarthy. I would like to have the court records here indicate that Dr. McCarthy, when he tried to testify on gunshot wounds, made many errors, so that maybe he will not be encouraged to do this in the future. Or if he does do this in the future, maybe he would consult someone who understands gunshot wounds and work in concert with them, which would be fine. Someone such as yourself? He might, but I doubt very much he would. And you are devoting how much time of your own time to this goal of discrediting Mr. McCarthy? Objection misstates the testimony. Overruled. I have never stated I have a goal of discrediting Dr. McCarthy as an individual. I cannot believe that the court overruled that, but whatever. He's holding his own, so I guess the court's like, yeah, whatever. He's fighting back. So Mr. Khan says, Doctor, I'm trying to point out that when an engineer with no training in medicine, that's you, Dr. McCarthy, the mechanical engineer, of an engineer with no training in medicine tries to testify on gunshot wounds and their effects on the human body, he is liable to make many gross errors, which has been proven in this case. And it's the engineer, not Dr. McCarthy, uh, that I'm trying to prove has made the errors. It's the engineer, not Dr. McCarthy himself, but the fact that you can't have an engineer testifying to this thing is what his point is that he's saying. And the simple thing is that he's testifying in a field that he doesn't understand, and it comes out very clearly in the things that I've pointed out. We'll go through his statements, doctor. At the moment, let me ask you this. Did you write a report in this case? I sent a memo. Yeah, I sent a memo. I think it might have been headed as a report, might have been headed as a memo. I don't recall. I did send something. This was a memo to advise counsel of the medical issue in this case that you feel might be beneficial in her examination of the witness. I think that was one of the things that was in it, yes. What else was in it? I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not sure. Do you have a copy of that report with you today? No, I don't. Mr. Khan says, I would ask that the witness be able to produce a copy of this report. The court says, do you have a report or do you have a copy? He says, I have an incomplete copy. Ms. Abramson says, what's that supposed to mean, counsel? Your Honor, I'd like to. Oh, Mr. Khan says, I have a complete copy, an incomplete copy. Ms. Abramson says, what's that supposed to mean? Counsel, Your Honor, I'd like to approach. The court says, let's not get into conversations between counsel. If counsel has a copy, you can provide it to the witness. Ms. Abramson says, move to strike counsel's remarks because it's making the defense seem like they're hiding something. The court says, all right, the remarks of counsel, either counsel, are stricken. They're not part of the record for the jury to consider. The witness says, I have it now. Mr. Khan says, may I see the document that you're referring to? Is this the document that you provided to counsel in the same form that you provided it to counsel? Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm going to object, move to strike, and ask to approach. The court says, all right, objection is sustained. There's no need to approach. This is the document that has been provided to the prosecution. The next question, please. Mr. Khan says, in that report, you advised counsel of medical opinions that might assist counsel in the examination of the witness. Is that correct? Yes. And did you advise her in regard to any other matters? Oh, I'll have to read the report to answer that question. Well, didn't you advise counsel? Objection, Your Honor. If he asked the question, he should let the witness read the report. Court says, well, he assumed from this that you're withdrawing your previous question. Mr. Khan says, yes. Don't you advise counsel in that report of other ways that you can attack Dr. McCarthy other than on the basis of his medical opinions? Your Honor, I'm going to object as argumentative. Overruled. Also calls for hearsay. Overruled. The witness says, I don't see any. I don't know. Can you point out any? You have the report? Mr. Khan says, yes. Do you recall advising counsel that referring to Dr. McCarthy, he describes what he did in the Army as maintaining weapons and teaching troops to use them? This is a far cry from doing research on bullet effects on a living body and would not qualify him to evaluate wounds caused by firearms. Did you write that to counsel? Yes, sir. Did you also advise counsel McCarthy presents no credentials dealing with gunshot wounds? He claims to be trained as an ordnance? It is spelled ordnance officer and has been doing research on firearms since then. His CV lists 52 presentations and 2 publications, none of which relates to firearms or wounds. Yes. I don't see anything wrong with this because if he's the expert in this field, he's like the OG expert of this field. And so he's pointing out what things Dr. McCarthy lacks in experience and knowledge in this field. I think it's perfectly fine what he's pointing out here. So you were advising counsel not only of the shortcomings of his medical opinions, but also that you should attack him on the basis of his CV. Ms. Amerson says, objection, misstates what's written. Overruled. I didn't tell her to attack him on anything. I just tried to advise her on the credentials of what I think should be required of someone who comes into court to testify to wounds of the human body and how he didn't have them. Exactly. And you were looking for ways to discredit him, which go beyond giving counsel the benefit of your medical expertise. Is that correct? Objection, Your Honor. Overruled. No, I don't believe that's going beyond the limits of my expertise at all. I'm putting more aggression, I think, in his voice than he is. He's probably like super calm, and I'm getting annoyed with Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan says, so you wrote in this way because you regard yourself as a member of the defense team at this point. Isn't that correct? Not at all. Objection. Argumentative. Overruled. The answer will stand. Isn't it true that the best way to see to it that Dr. McCarthy is discredited is by seeing that Erik and Lyle Menendez are not convicted in this case? Well, my sole goal is not to discredit Dr. McCarthy as an individual, and it is simply, as I have previously stated, to try to point out the errors that will creep into expert testimony when people who are supposed experts testify in areas that they have no real expertise. That's what I'm trying to do. I think he's been very clear and straightforward with you on that point, sir. Like talking about the fact that a person who's being shot at is likely to respond to shots in some way. You feel that Dr. McCarthy has no expertise that would allow him to draw that simple conclusion. Is that correct, sir? Objection, argumentative in content and tone. Objection sustained. All right, objection sustained. Is one of the conclusions that you feel Dr. McCarthy has no credentials to express an opinion the fact that someone who's being shot at might get up and try to defend himself in some way? Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. And you feel that there are no persons in the world who can reach that conclusion because it is not a reasonable conclusion. Is that correct? No persons in the world, did you say? Yes, that was my question, sir. Please repeat the question. Do you feel that there are no persons in the world who can reach that conclusion because that is not a reasonable conclusion? Is that correct? Objection, argumentative, calls for speculation. Do you understand the question? Compound. Overruled. Do you understand the question? The witness says, there's 2 questions that I'm trying to sort them out. One seems to be dependent one upon the other. Let's have it re-asked then. Mr. Khan says, sir, do you not feel it is a reasonable conclusion that if a person is being shot with a shotgun and if he has the ability to respond to it in some way, he is going to get up and he is going to respond to it in some way? He's going to get up and respond to it in some way if he can. He might and he might not, but the person who would be most expert in this would be someone who has dealt with the subject in the past and has had some experience and some credentials and some training on the subject of what people do after they're shot. And who do you feel is the best qualified person to express an opinion as to whether someone who's being shot at would be likely to respond to the shooting in some way? Well, I'd start with an MD behind his name, and then I would add to that training in either surgery or pathology, and in addition, an interest and experience in forensics. And with those qualifications, then I think a person that has these would be the person that I would give you that would give you the most reliable answer to that question. You're telling us, sir, you've got to go to medical school. You have to be a doctor to know that if someone is shooting at you with a shotgun, you're going to respond to protect yourself in some way. Well, I think the response was based on, in Mr. McCarthy's testimony, was based on the pain that was caused. That was why the person would have had pain and responded, as I recall from his wording in his report. And of course, that is based on a layman's misconception that getting shot with firearms is uniformly a very painful act, which it is not. One of the reasons why Dr. McCarthy expressed the opinion that someone would respond to a shotgun attack upon himself was because of the pain. Is that correct? That's what he stated in his report. Did it not also occur to you, sir, that one of the reasons why Dr. McCarthy was saying that someone would respond to a shotgun attack upon himself is because people generally disfavor shotgun attacks upon themselves? I'm going to object to this as argumentative. There's no foundation. The court says objection sustained to the form of the question. Did you feel that Dr. McCarthy was expressing the opinion that people respond to shotgun attacks upon themselves if they are capable of doing so only because there is pain involved or for no other reason? Your Honor, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation. Overruled. Well, he stated his reason was that it was painful. Anything else you ask me to do must be an assumption of what else he might have been thinking, and I don't know what else he was thinking. All I can respond to is what I saw in the written word. Damn, he's a good witness on cross examination. Mr. Khan says, uh-huh. And you felt that it was unreasonable to draw the conclusion that if a person was being shot by a shotgun, that person would experience pain? Yes. Okay, doctor, getting back to this wound that you described for us earlier, I'm going to actually stop here before we get to the next question. We'll stop here because I went a lot longer than I intended, because we went past the morning break because her direct examination only lasted for about 45 minutes, so I wanted to give you guys a little bit extra. So that's that. We will continue on with cross examination of Dr. Martin Fackler, who is totally killing it on the stand. He is going toe to toe with or Mr. Khan. Why do I keep calling him Doctor? With Mr. Khan, and he's holding his own. He's telling Mr. Khan what he really thinks, and I like it. He's been very forthcoming, been forthcoming about his opinions, and especially his opinion about Dr. McCarthy. He's saying he doesn't have a vendetta, but yet he's twisting it. He's, of course, twisting it and trying to make it, oh, you're just trying to attack our witness. Well, no, what would be the point of that? Like, do you have some evidence that they have some kind of long-standing rivalry? No. He's just trying to present his opinions that are based on, actual experience in the field. But whatever. Let me know what you guys think. We'll continue on, like I said, with cross examination of Dr. Fackler in the next episode. That would be Monday, right? Yeah. So take care, guys. Have a great weekend, and I will see you then. Bye, guys.